Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Woo! Those are some mighty scary birth pangs. This passage from Mark about the destruction of the temple is frequently identified as apocryphal, which, like many of the prophets, are predicting what God may make happen. The destruction of the temple was seen or experienced as a violation of the status quo, the familiar, the way they knew where to worship God. It was the end. In fact, many of our Christian siblings consider this passage literally and look for wars, nations against nation, earthquakes, and famines to predict the end of times. Whether Huxley's 1984, Squid Games, remember that? The Last of Us, The Hunger Games, or even The Handmaid's Tale. This is not a new concept in our current culture and world. It would be easy to consider this passage as a cautionary tale that the sky is falling, our culture is at risk, and the world is ending. But if we do that, I think we will miss what Jesus is calling us to be and do today. So let's look at what Jesus is calling. First, Jesus admonishes us to screen our future leaders carefully. They may lead us astray and take credit for being God, but not be God. We always are looking for leaders who we can trust. Our work is to recognize leaders who lead us, want the best for us, and have the same values we hear in the gospel. Second, Jesus tells us to remain calm in unsettling circumstances. Then, now, and in the future. For the upcoming disasters and human-created catastrophes are necessary. I personally appreciate how the Message translation of this passage captures this. When you hear of wars and rumored wars, keep your head and don't panic. This is routine history and no sign of the end. In effect, Jesus is encouraging us not to be distracted from his gospel by the distressing events. Now, it may be helpful to understand what was happening during Mark's time as this was written. Now, some historians believe it was written just before the Jewish revolt, perhaps 66 Common Era, and the destruction of the temple. And other historians just after the destruction. Either way, the destruction of the temple was imminent, and their solid, trusted representation of their tradition was destroyed, perhaps even destroying their faith and their belief. Roman historian Tacitus recorded that when arrested at this time, Christians indicted fellow Christians. Clement of Rome wrote that through jealousy and envy, the righteous pillars of the church were persecuted. He noted evidence of discord within the Christian community that led to persecution of fellow Christians. He and Tacitus both noted a picture of familial division and betrayal that allowed persecution by Nero. It's really hard to miss the parallels between what was happening then and what is happening today. We hear about and talk about our divided country and world, and we have the strength and entrenchment of our own opinions and possessions. So, it is totally appropriate to listen to what Jesus is asking of the disciples. It seems to be the time to move from darkness to light, from alienation to divine community, from the fear of hostile situations to assurance. Through our abiding faith, we can experience God's grace, God's knowledge and understanding of how to be and what to do. Jesus offers a small reminder to us to look beyond the appearances of what is going on and worship and be with God. We have a true center in the midst of all this chaos. Now, ever since I read this passage in preparation for today, I have had this vision or this metaphoric picture in my mind of what this might look like. So please bear with me as I describe it for you. My picture includes me hiking through and on a very narrow path in the Grand Canyon between two very high and steep walls of rocks. One side, represented by the temple of my faith and traditional status quo, with all its large sand-colored stones. I was familiar with this side, and I was, okay with this wall. On the other side was a large, dark rock face of dark, slimy rock, which represented the wars, earthquakes, famines, and our human-created catastrophes. It was wet, smelly, and yucky. The path itself reminded me of a hike that I took years ago while rafting down the Colorado River. I could hardly see the light at the top of the canyon, and yet I knew thoughtfully that I could walk forward. I was on a journey and confident I would be able to continue. Now, so how do we connect with God? So each of us, I should say, can have our own vision of how we maneuver through challenges. Yes, we may be touched by the awful destruction of our own temple or the challenges around us. We are all on that path between the destroyed temple and the challenges or chaos of our world. We too will be able to walk through it. Jesus set out for the disciples and us a way to live that did not put our focus on the attention of the temple, but on our witness to the gospel in our lives. The gospel we know today, loving our neighbor as ourselves, seeing God in each person we meet, respecting the dignity of each person, loving our enemies, is God's witness to everyone and those we meet. Now, in no way am I saying this is going to be easy, especially when it is so easy to get caught on either side of the path. It will take effort on our part. Each one of us needs to find the way we can experience God's grace and knowledge for ourselves. Connecting with God as we understand God is the start. Because connecting with God can be very healing. So, how do we connect with God? Now, you may already have some favorite ways. For some, it may be here in worship. Perhaps you get moved and connect with God when you sing the Gloria at the beginning of the service. Perhaps when you share with us at the table for communion. Perhaps when you share and are listening to a psalm sung. For some, it may be in relationships. Perhaps you connect with God when you play with your grandchildren or your children. Perhaps during a deep and meaningful conversation with a friend. And perhaps when you see someone do something absolutely awe-inspiring. For some, it may be when you are in service. Perhaps you connect with God when loading the food pantry or doing a youth group project. Perhaps when you share your gift of music, or when you visit a dear friend who just can't get out of their home. For some, it may be in nature. Perhaps it was last night looking up and seeing that incredible, beautiful moon, or the gorgeous colors of the leaves this fall, or the beach or the mountains, but in nature. For some, it may be in the spiritual practice or in prayer. Perhaps yoga, centering prayer, walking the labyrinth, praying morning prayer or even compline. For some, it actually may be in study. That's where you find God. Perhaps the community of adult forum or holy households. The common factor for connecting with God is looking for and seeing God in the small elements of every day. Walking with God on the path between those rock walls and letting God into your life. By experiencing the vision that I shared with you, I was able to fondly remember my dear Aunt Kitty, who went with me on that trip to the Grand Canyon. When picturing the remainder of the path, I recalled that where we ended up was a beautiful waterfall with great pond at the bottom, in which we all laughed and swam and were under that waterfall. We were like little kids with joy. So, as we all walk that path between our crumbled temple and the inevitable chaos of the world together, I pray we too connect with God's love and share God's gospel through living our lives. Amen.